Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the British Columbia Museums Association webinar. My name is Lorinda Calvert, and I will be your host for today. Today's webinar topic is Measuring What Matters, Tracking Data and Measuring Impact at Your Cultural Heritage Institute, and is presented by Ken Amaral, Policy and Research Analyst for the Department of Canadian Heritage. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that as an organization of provincial scope, the BCMA recognizes that its members, today's presenters, and attendees occupy the lands and territories of BC's Indigenous peoples. We ask all of you to reflect on the places where you reside and work and to respect the diversity of cultures and experiences that form its richness. As I mentioned, I'm Lorinda Calvert, your host for today. I'm also BCMA's Programs Coordinator. My pronouns are she, her, and I want to thank you for joining us. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please do email our office. Vanessa, our operations manager, is standing by to assist. A small bit of housekeeping before we begin. Please use the chat feature to ask questions or make comments. I will read your comments or questions out to the host. There'll be time at the end of the presentation reserved for Q&A. And I believe Ken may invite folks to ask questions throughout the presentation, in which case I will read your questions out at that time. The chat feature at the bottom of your screen may be hidden, so if you hold your mouse either at the top or bottom of your screen, the feature menu should emerge. In an effort to improve accessibility, there is a live transcription service available. If you click on Live on Otter AI, Live Notes, View Stream at the top left corner of this window, a separate website will open in your browser. As with many things this year, this is a new service that we are testing out, so we appreciate any feedback you have. As I mentioned, this month's presenter is Ken Amaral, Policy and Research Analyst from the Department of Canadian Heritage. And over to you, Ken. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you very much, and I will to share mine. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this session. As was stated, my name is Ken Amaral, and I'm a Policy and Research Analyst with the Department of Canadian Heritage. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2019 Government Canada Survey of Heritage Institutions. It's an overview of the latest financial and operating activities, and there will be a focus on obviously on BC's heritage sector for this one. I manage and oversee the survey, and so I have, I guess you could say, quite the intimate relationship with this survey. It was first started at the department back in 2012, and this is now the fourth iteration of this survey after taking it over from Stats Canada back in 2012. So the purpose of this survey is it collects financial and operating data needed to produce statistics, and it's solely on not-for-profit heritage institutions. The survey provides us timely data. It's used for policy decisions in the department, also heavily used by provincial and territorial governments. Just a quick overview, the survey breaks institutions down by 5 types, and so that's art galleries, museums, archives, historic sites, zoos, and botanical gardens. And then it also breaks it down by province and by territory. Just quickly, many of institutions, for the most part, are more than one entity, as I'm sure all of you know. And so, like, an organization can be a museum that is situated at a historic site and also has, let's say, an archive on site. And so for the purpose of this survey, we capture these institutions by their primary function, and we ask them what their primary function is, and that's how we sort of break it down. And the point of this is to just not double count or have any sort of double counting going on. That said, all of these institution types are considered a heritage institution. On to the next slide. So I sort of want to just give a layout of the land for BC. But generally speaking, there's approximately 2,700 not-for-profit museums and other heritage institutions across the country. For BC, it's 351, so which makes up about 13% of all institutions in Canada. The majority of those in BC are museums, 53%, and then that's followed by archives, and then historic sites with 12%. Art galleries, that's archives and art galleries at 14%, historic sites at 12%, and then zoos and botanical gardens. There's 22 of those in the province. And then just another sort of, just to put things into context, the majority of institutions, so 49%, nearly 50%, are considered small sized institutions. This is based on annual operating revenues. So approximately 50% of institutions in BC are considered small, so operating revenues below 100,000. And so just to sort of, in a subcategory of that, like to be, so really about 32% of all institutions actually have revenues below 40,000. So sort of just to give you a bit of context in terms of the size of the majority of institutions in the province. This is also true for the majority of Canada. BC actually fares quite well, where they have a higher percentage of medium to large size institutions versus small. The small institutions across the country, I mean, these percentages vary from province to province. But for BC, this is the breakdown. And so 40% are considered medium, between 100 and 1,000,000 in operating, and then 11% are large institutions. So with that, I am going to jump into the highlights from the latest survey results. So these survey results are from, they capture the 2017 data year, which happened to coincide with the Canada 150 celebrations. So with that, we're going over the investments and activities that happened during that year, during the Canada 150. So in BC, annual revenues for 2017 reached approximately $264 million. That's an increase of nearly 53 million from 2011. So, a 25% increase, which is pretty good. So looking at this chart here, you can see that the light blue is what's called unearned revenues. And this is things like government funding, donations, and so forth. And then the earned revenue is obviously admissions and whatnot. And so we see that it holds fairly steady. Generally speaking, it's about 52% is unearned revenue, so government funding and donations, whereas the other 48% is the earned side. So fairly close to half. When looking at 2017, it's 53 and 47. Again, those numbers hold fairly steady, have held fairly steady over the years. I mean, there was, obviously we can see that there's a big, you could almost say that there's a big change, obviously from 2015 to 2017. We can see that, 2011 to 2013, there's a bit of a blip there in that coming up to 2012, there was the War of 1812, so the commemoration of that. And there's a lot of investment that went into that from the federal government and provincial governments from, even before 2011. And so we see the residual of that in 2011, and that kind of dips down in 2013 and more so in 2015 on the unearned side, so donations, government funding. But then there's a big leap again back. You see it goes from 106 million to 140 million for unearned in 2017. So, it coincides with the investments that were happening again from War of 1812, and then again in 2017 with the Canada 150. Expenses, the majority of expenses, the biggest chunk, it goes towards compensation, wages, and admin. And this makes up about 45%, and that's up from 44% in 2015. So just something to point out. We'll get into later a bit how that differs from the different size of institutions, but for now, that's essentially it. It's wage and compensation, and the second one, I think, after other expenses is accommodations, so the upkeep of the institutions that they're in. So revenues and expenses again. With that, British Columbia posted a modest revenue of over expenditure of 4.8. So, profit margin of 4.8%, about 12 million in 2017. Though I want to reiterate that this, profit margin, really it's going towards the bigger institutions. They account for most of this net revenue. the survey data shows that approximately 55% of all institutions in BC only really had a net revenue of about 5,000 or less. In fact, approximately, a third of heritage institutions reported a net loss. So it's just to sort of give that, we see that, not that 12, or 13 million, I'm not saying that these are enormous amount of money, but it's just to show, again, to put into context that a lot of these earnings are going more to sort of the bigger institutions. The heritage sector workforce in BC has been climbing since 2011. And so there were nearly 5,000 people working in BC in 2017 in the heritage sector. And that's up 12% from 2015 and nearly 30% in 2011. And it's not just part-time that has increased, it is full-time. So the light blue has also increased over the years. So volunteers, again, I'm just flying through these. These are the highlights from the survey. The presentation is very sort of like data heavy, but I'll try to make data as interesting as possible, or as exciting as possible. But my apologies if I'm going too fast as I'm going through these sort of highlights. Volunteers. So just as in Canada, volunteers outnumber paid employees 3 to 1. So there were over 18,260 volunteers in BC in 2017. And then those volunteers contributed nearly 940,000 hours, which equates to about 450 full-time equivalent positions. And not to take away from the qualitative work that volunteers do, but it's just that we try to sort of demonstrate the value, these almost like economic value of what that means. And as we know that 17% of heritage institutions in BC are solely run by volunteers. This is below the national average of 20%, but that said, that number is actually most likely a bit higher, because as soon as there is an institution that hires a contract worker or a part-time worker, even for a week, then they're taken out of that equation. But for the most part, I'm going to say, conservatively speaking, it's nearly 20%, or so 17% of all institutions in BC are solely run by volunteers. Attendance. Attendance was great in 2017. And so there was a record 9.5 million physical visits to all heritage institutions. Visits increased by 5% over 2015 and 13% from 2011. So again, you see this pattern here. 2011, so before the commemoration of 1812, there were still a lot of exhibitions and whatnot. And so in 2013, it went from sort of a lull, and then there's a jump. And then 2015, over that 2-year span, sort of a little bit of a lull, but then a jump again for the celebrations for the Canada 150. The majority of visits are happening at museums, again, because they literally outnumber all other types of heritage institutions. And then that's followed by zoos and botanical gardens, art galleries, and historic sites. So quickly, sort of other industry characteristics. So the survey captures online visits, and online visits continue its trend of increase year over year. So in BC, there's over 34 million visits to all heritage institutions. And that has been jumping up much, much faster than physical visits. And that goes without saying. That's true across Canada, and that's true also even in other sectors. But definitely there needs to be some, we know that there's definite demand that's going on within the online realm, and that there needs to be attention to that. School groups, we capture the number of school groups that attend heritage institutions. And so in BC specifically, there were approximately 16,500 school groups. And so that equates to approximately 827,000 student visits. Another highlight is we capture research requests to institutions to sort of show the demand on for that in terms of trusted information. We know that, and there are other surveys that point to this. For example, the Arts and Heritage Access and Availability Survey, which is another survey that the Department of Canadian Heritage does. They do public opinion polls, and that their latest survey, you know, I think it's in the realm of 80-something percent, 88% or 85%, agree that museums and other heritage institutions are a trusted source of information. This number has been increasing as well over the years, so that's good to see. And then membership to heritage institutions. So reached 204,000 in BC alone. Exhibitions, we also, the survey also captures exhibitions. And so there were many new exhibitions in 2017. BC produced approximately 1,200 new exhibitions, which was nice to see. There were over 2,100 permanent exhibitions in BC in 2017. And again, all this data is broken down by type of institution and then by province, but obviously we're just looking at BC right now. So all of this, these are just high-level sort of highlights. You can go into the report and see this data broken down by type of institution inside of BC. And then, also circulated, over 230 exhibitions were circulated in 2017. And museums, obviously, again, because they outnumber the majority of other institutions, they circulated the majority of them, so nearly 70%. And then this is followed by art galleries at 13% and archives at 12%. Online exhibitions, there were 359 in 2017 from all heritage institutions in BC. Museums lead in online presence. So they've 37% of all these online exhibitions are hosted by museums. 35% are by archives, so very close, very close in there. Archives is a type of institution that definitely punches above their weight. They have the least in terms of funding and any kind of revenues, like earned revenues, but they seem to online anyway, seem to bang for buck, for lack of better phrasing, seem to do really well in terms of producing. And then art galleries at 25% of these online exhibitions. So there is a section of the survey, I won't get too much into it, but there's a lot of things that are taken into consideration when conducting any kind of survey. And so one of those is survey fatigue. And obviously we'd like to ask every single question that we would like to ask, but that is not feasible. And so a lot of times people who are filling out, or institutions who are filling out surveys, if you don't follow sort of strict guidelines, they tend to trail off and they won't, then they only get about halfway through if it's too long, and then they'll, and I mean, obviously for many, we'll just be like, this is, I'm not going to continue. So in order to avoid that, we try to make the survey as short as possible and as user-friendly as possible. And so one of the things that we've done is we've incorporated a section that captures timely information. In the past, that's meant that in 2013, we captured how many objects there are in total, in heritage institutions. Last year, 2017, we captured the demographics of the workforce. So we know, gender, age, visible minority, and that's all. You can find that all online as well. That's in the last report. And then so for this report, we decided to capture. We shortened this year's survey. We almost like a survey light, because we knew there was a number of surveys going out at the time. And so we didn't want to overwhelm the sector. But this year, based on the mandate letter to our minister, there is currently a mandate for Indigenous repatriation of cultural artifacts. as well as other mandate priorities. But so we decided to capture or to have a look and see how much Indigenous cultural artifacts were being held at or housed at heritage institutions across the country. And so we now know that 26%, so this is again just for BC, so 26% of, my apologies, this is for all of Canada. And so we know that approximately 26% of heritage institutions reported that they house Indigenous cultural artifacts. There are approximately 6.7 million artifacts in heritage institutions across the country. And so, you know, again, for context, 8 of the largest archaeological institutions have collections with archaeological collections, care for 94% of these items. And so these aren't just objects that are strewn all over the country in different organizations or institutions. A big chunk of them are literally in 8 institutions in the country. By province, the majority are located in Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, and BC. Again, nationally, we also asked the question on Indigenous ancestral remains. And so the statistics show that just over 1% of heritage institutions reported that they house Indigenous ancestral remains. And just as a note, so remains can be, these are partial and sometimes fragmented remains. Again, just to put into context the types of ancestral remains that might be housed in these institutions. There are an estimated 2,500 ancestral remains, and then 3 museums care for 75% of all ancestral remains. The majority of these remains are located in BC, and then are in BC and Ontario. Another sort of timed questions that we put in this section was on infrastructure, and so we wanted to we captured a bit of this the last time around as well, but we just wanted to touch on it again. And so we wanted to know the overall physical condition of buildings and capital infrastructure at institutions. And we threw it down to 6 categories. So it was either very poor, fair, but acquired some attention, good, or very good. And so we can see that, you know, so this is in BC. So in BC, 48% say that their institutions are good or very good. And then, so that leaves approximately, so there are 9% who say they don't know or it doesn't apply. And then 41% say that, you know, that their facilities either require attention or are poor. And so if we look at this, let's say this is at a provincial level. So provinces seem to do fairly well. So they have the highest percentage of institutions with good or very good. You can see the green is, I've narrowed this down to simplify it a bit. And so the light blue is poor or very poor. And then the dark blue is fair but requires attention. And then the green is the good or very good. And red is just, they didn't know or it didn't apply. And so you can see in the Atlantic provinces, Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, even Nova Scotia, fairly high. So they're reporting that their institutions, at least high percentages of their institutions, facilities are good or very good. When looking at some of the other provinces and territories, we can see that the territories have reported the highest percentage of institutions with facilities that require attention or are poor, and that's at 56%. This is followed by Manitoba at 44%, and then British Columbia at 43%. So it just gives an idea, again, none of this is sort of alarming, let's say, but it's just to give an indication that, you know, some attention needs to be given, especially directed within some provinces in particular. With that, we also asked what sort of planned infrastructure or upgrades these organizations or institutions were planning over the next 3 years. And so in BC, you know, 2/3 of institutions said that they were planning to undertake at least some sort of infrastructure project. And so 44% said that they're planning improvements to current facility, like improving visitor flow, accessibility, storage, and curatorial spaces. 41% said they were planning improvements to visitor experience, like displays and exhibits. 33% are planning improvements to their facilities' physical plans. So HVAC, anything that infrastructure, like maybe insulation, lighting. 30 are planning construction of a new facility or expansion to the existing facility. And then you've got 16 not planning any at all, or anything within the next 3 years, and 13 who they're not sure, they don't know, or it does not apply. So this is where we sort of get into the meat and potatoes. And again, my apologies if I'm going a little too quickly. Again, I realize, or I can appreciate that this is a very data-heavy type of presentation. So I'll slow down here for this bit, which is one of my favorite, so that this year, because of the Survey Lite, we were able to, and we've done this in the past, we did this back in 2015. And so we're able to we took museums and art galleries, and we combined them, and then we split them down to size. And the reason for this is so that we can see the discrepancies between the activities for institutions that are considered small and then larger institutions. Because a lot of times, people like to get averages, which are great, but getting average, it's not as accurate, except when you start to break it down into subcategories, it starts to get a lot more accurate. And so that's what we're going to do now. So this is for museums and art galleries by size in BC. So we can see that just by the number of institutions, there's about 111 small, 100 medium, and 23 large institutions. So it equates to 235. And here are the numbers. So these are, this should say that, so these figures are in thousands of dollars. So you can see, so here we have the actual numbers. And in this, sorry about that, jeez. And in this bottom table here, what I've done is I've broken down the percentages to this total. So all these percentages, it's the percentages from these numbers, okay? So, and the point of this is, so we can see sort of what each type of, and this is for unearned funding, again, so for government and donations. And so we can see sort of what, the percentage of funding that small, medium, large institutions receive from government and from donations. Here we can see for small institutions that, 23% of their unearned funding comes from federal government. For larger institutions in BC, it equates to 4% of their overall unearned revenue. Provincial government seems to be fairly steady, so they're giving about 20% to small they make up 20% of small institutions unearned revenue. For medium-sized institutions, it's also around close to 20%. And then for larger institutions, you can see that for provincial government, obviously they have provincial institutions, and so they're funding those. And so a majority of provincial government's funding, or a big chunk of these big institutions in BC, their funding comes from provincial government. That's a big one for them. And so local government, we can see local government, they make up 31% for small institutions, 46% for medium. So obviously local government, there you can see that their investment is going into, if you look here, I mean, it's 11 million, and it's very close in terms of how they're trying to fund medium size. So the percentages are sort of demonstrate the need, so or their dependence. So a small institution, they depend heavily on local and on government funding in general. I mean, and so for donations, we can see donations for small institutions or small museums and art galleries only make up 10%. So for these are tax receipted donations, and then 10%. But obviously big donations going to larger BC museum and art galleries. When we look at this by an average, then you can start, then this is a little more accurate picture. So this would be BC as a total. And then if we were to not look at any of these three, we would say, oh, well, each institution is receiving, federal government's giving them about 26, now these are real figures, so $26,700, but that's not the case. For small institutions, it's more like $5,000, and then $30,000, and then $118,000, and so on and so forth. So this gives a much clearer breakdown. So total unearned revenue. So the general small museum makes in unearned revenue, they generate about 21,000, and then it's 242,000 for medium size, and then it's like 2 million. You can see these are jumps of like almost 21 to 242 to 2 million, and so this is a much more accurate picture of how funding is sort of being dispersed. I just want to reiterate again, with these small institutions, these are the, there's 111, a big chunk of them have revenues below 40,000. So now we're going to look at the earned revenues. So there's unearned and then there's earned. And earned is obviously, your admissions, your membership fees, so on and so forth, sales of goods and services. And so I've done the same thing that I did up at the other one for unearned. And so here are the numbers, and these are in thousands of dollars. So this would be 88,000. This would be 5.9 million. And then I've taken that and I've broken down those percentages to the total. And so here we see a different picture. Here we see a different picture from all three levels. And so, for example, admission fees for small museums only make up 12% of their total earned revenues. But you go to the large museums, and it's obviously admission fees are very important for these larger museums. The same thing can be attributed to, let's say, fundraising. Fundraising, we can see, is very important to small museums. But for larger museums, not necessarily as important. It makes up a smaller percentage of their overall earned revenue. Income from rental of facilities. It's not huge differences, but it is in the grand scheme of things when you look at the numbers. And so larger institutions are renting out their facilities, and it seems to be playing a significant role in their earned revenue. Less so for medium, even less so for smaller institutions. And so this sort of paints that picture. This sort of paints that picture of, I want to say, the reason why I'm demonstrating this is to show the need. And so we can see things going forward. We can use these statistics, let's say, for example. And so for programming at the federal or even, let's say, the provincial level, we can see that not one type of programming fits all institutions. So let's just say for fundraising, because it's a big deal for small institutions, it seems to make up a major part of their earned revenues. Maybe then a program could be directed at them that says, does, I don't know, matching funding by any kind of matching funding, depending on however it is you want to sort of detail that. But for larger institutions, that the programming wouldn't be focused on matching, because they, where they would benefit mostly would be, let's say, something to do with admission fees. And so, not to get into the different types of program, but you can see that it's not a one hat fits all. And when we have data, and we do have quite a bit of it, and it's fairly rich, that we're able to see this, that paint this picture and be like, I see, or we see, these institutions need this, these institutions need this, this is where they could use help, and this is where they could use help. So again, I'm just putting this, and this information is available to you. I've forwarded the special report to BCMA, and I'll be happy to forward this to anybody who would be curious to look further into the special report on by size of institution. But it was just to demonstrate it. Sort of, you can now see, paints kind of a picture of like what's going on in a much more accurate, picture. The last one here is expenses, and so this will again. So you can see that the majority of expenses, and this makes sense, right? So for large institutions, it's their compensation and wages. Same thing for medium-sized institutions. Yet for small institutions, it's not a big part. It's not the biggest part. It's a much smaller. But I mean, that would make sense. Of course, they have less employees and less staffing challenges in terms of staffing and funding challenges. Occupancy costs, you can see for small museums, that seems to be a big ticket item. As we go to bigger museums, not so much. It just goes down as you get bigger because, this is anecdotal, but their operations are bigger. And so this, when it comes to, rent is rent no matter who you are. And yes, these institutions are, these organizations are in bigger buildings, but my understanding is that rent is pretty expensive in BC. And so this is something, again, this is just to sort of paint that picture. Well, it looks like they could use some help with, some relief for rent, less so than say the larger institutions could. And then so on and so forth. Same thing goes for, if we look at, say, compensation and wages. Well, it looks like the bigger institutions could use some relief for, employment funding, whereas not so much for, smaller institutions. Again, so just wanting to help, I feel, I know that this is, the presentation was supposed to be geared towards focus on smaller institutions. And so this is what I'm trying to do, is to, by separating it like this, we can see what the activities look like in comparison, and this is comparing apples to apples. So, and you can see that there is a discrepancy between small and larger institutions, not just in BC, but this is true for all of Canada. So these are the industry characteristics. So again, this is for 2017, and we can see again that there's activity no matter which level you're at. And so you've got, for example, there's employees, yes, and then there's volunteers. Like you look at the volunteer hour per volunteer, it's very high here, whereas it's going to be much lower here and lower here. But then there's things like, and I get it that there's more institutions, but let's look at, for example, the number of permanent exhibitions by small institutions in the province. They outnumber the number of permanent exhibitions by the larger institutions. Same goes for exhibitions hosted online. Smaller institutions have more exhibitions online than the larger institutions do, than the largest, of institutions do. Exhibitions circulated. So again, I know that there's more, but you can see clearly that, as a group, small institutions have circulated more exhibitions than the medium or large put together. Research requests, same thing. Small institutions are receiving these. Medium-sized institutions, right, also receiving them. Good to see BC large institutions. So over 33,000, that's great. But it's just not to discount what's happening down at these levels, especially at these levels here. So it's clear that even though, in terms of revenue, they're not getting, obviously it's almost non-comparable to say large institutions, even medium. But that's not to say that there's not activity happening in this area. There's actually quite a bit of activity happening, and they're definitely in terms of the grand scheme of things, this is the group that's punching above their weight. They're doing the most with the least in a number of cases. So, and a lot of that is obviously due to the volunteers, which again outnumber the paid workforce by 3 to 1. Quickly, the benefits of this survey. So for those of you who don't already know, I mean, this survey has been an incredible tool for us at the federal level in helping make some policy decisions, and not just at the federal, but we know provincial and territorial level governments are also using this data extensively. And so it helps us to pinpoint, as I was just showing you, sort of where to direct help and better protect our heritage. We know that another one of the mandates for our department is to review and update the National Museum Policy. And so I can tell you that this survey, the data from this latest one especially, is going to be one of the basis for the research that we do into this new museum policy, to determine what the needs are, where the needs are. So it's definitely going to be an incredible tool for that. And I can tell you firsthand that the emergency relief funding that was out for COVID, I was involved in that, and the survey data was immensely important in helping us to not just get the funding out and direct it, and it was and quite accurately actually, we had a really good idea of the number of institutions that would require help, as well as the amount of funding that would be required. And it was essential in getting it out, not just by the amounts and counts, but the speed at which the emergency funding was able to be dispersed. The survey definitely played an immense role in that. And so next survey. The next survey, I mean, this one was delayed a bit. This survey was supposed to come out in May. And for obvious reasons, it was postponed. Again, a big chunk of that was because I was pulled off the project and was solely dedicated to just working on and providing data for the emergency funding. But that said, the next survey, even though this one just literally came out like a month ago, the next survey will be conducted in 2021. And the normal sort of cycle would be that we would be capturing the 2019 data year. It's always 2 years behind for various reasons. It's just to be able to capture as much data as possible. But we're considering possibly skipping a year, and so still conducting it next year, but capturing 2020 and to see what the effects of COVID were on the sector. We haven't come to a decision yet. We're still trying to work out the kinks and see if it's going to make sense. Because as much as it would be amazing to have that data, it will skew, or it could possibly skew longitudinal data. Like the numbers will be out of whack. But that's not to say that we wouldn't do it. It's just to say that we have to sort of review what that will mean going forward. But I think that might be a strong possibility. And then the last thing is just that for the next survey, we will be consulting with all the Provincial Museums Association and other associations like archival associations, the national associations and other stakeholders to see sort of what kind of questions they would like asked this time around. Again, we'd like to ask every single question we possibly could, but that is not possible. And so we'll try to amalgamate all these sort of ideas and then whittle it down to you know, the minimal amount of questions that we think should be included, or the maximum amount of questions that we think should be included. But that is essentially it. Thank you very much, and I am ready for questions.
Thank you, Ken. I'm just going to reshare my screen just with my slide that will remind folks how to post questions. So you can use the chat or Q&A function. The taskbar may be hidden, so just hover your mouse at the top or bottom of your screen, and those should pop up. We already have a few questions coming in, Ken. The first one was that, will these slides be available and accessible for folks?
Absolutely. I will email them to the BCMA, and then the BCMA can do as they wish.
Wonderful. And for all of our participants and registrants, a recording of this webinar will be sent out. So you'll get the recording of the webinar, and then through Ken, we'll get a copy of the slides. We have a question here from Anissa. She says, Ken, you mentioned survey fatigue. Just curious if we can describe, or if you can describe, excuse me, any sort of best practices for museums and heritage organizations for capturing this data throughout the year so that the info is ready to go when surveys come out.
Yes, so just curious. Okay, describe best practices. So the thing is, you know, we try to capture. So if a lot of, I mean, again, as I'm sure many of you know, a number of museums are run by associations which happen to be registered charities, and so we're able to, lighten the burden. We try to get as much information from CRA that we can to then not have to ask that question to the museum, which speed things up and makes things very easy for them. The rule of thumb is the less amount of questions, the better sent. But for institutions who are looking to sort of have this data prepared, what we're hoping will happen is that, so like I said, this is the 4th time we've done this. I think, I hope that a number of institutions across the country in the sector, and with promotion from the provincial museums associations and archival associations, that the word is getting out, that, you know, this is going to be happening, and this is coming, and this is a thing. And we definitely see that in the response rate. And I can say that I can honestly say BC has one of the highest response rates of all provinces and territories. And so the only, you know, I guess it would just be, you know, there's going to be revenue and expenditure questions. If you're not a registered charity, that's going to be the case. But you know, the next, I would say, I mean, we can send out a questionnaire, but the questionnaire, it doesn't necessarily change every time. The core questions always remain the same. There's just a section of it that changes, and it's very small. And so I would say that, you know, I mean, we could do something where, like, we send out a PDF of the questionnaire to have it, but it's essentially, I think it's just, and again, we try to do this, you know, before the survey even goes out, we're already promoting it like 2-3 weeks ahead of time, saying this is coming, you know, start getting stuff ready. But the truth of the matter is, and again, we get an incredible response rate. I can't deny that. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, to be blunt, no one likes doing surveys. They are time consuming. And so, and we understand that. Because that's just the, you know, nature of the beast. But I would say there's not much to it in terms of preparing. It's, again, we always go 2 years back, and so we try to communicate as much as possible in terms of what our needs are. So these are the questions. There's always going to be, obviously, visit questions, online visit questions, number of workers, things of that nature. But for, like, say, you know, the special questions or the timely questions in that special section of the questionnaire, there's no way around sort of preparing for that. except for that when we do send out, before we send out the survey, we're already emailing institutions directly. And then at the same time, it's almost like blitzing, the sector, all sectors in every province. So you're going to be hearing it from BCMA, you're going to be hearing it directly from the Department of Canadian Heritage. And so in terms, other than, it's as simple as literally looking at this survey report, and you'll see the kind of questions that are going to come at you next time around. We can't make anyone fill out the survey. We would never do that. But there's a lot of times, where responses don't come, and it's just because, we understand this too. It's, you guys are busy, especially the smaller institutions they're just doing their best to keep lights on and literally the bathroom clean, versus bigger institutions that have the resources. And then we also understand that the sector is over-surveyed. It's not that it's an issue. People just want to have data, and this sector in particular seems to get surveyed quite a bit because, we're constantly justifying our existence. That's what this sector is always doing. It's like, we need funding. We know we need funding, or the sector knows it needs funding. It's long overdue. But up until we started to sort of produce this survey, it was always, well, we know we need some money, but well, how much do you need? Demonstrate to us what the needs are. And I'm going off a little bit here, but demonstrate what the needs are. But then that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to do. And so, in a nutshell, to be prepared for these, it's just a matter of getting the word out, promoting that this is coming. And then it really is as easy as just looking at the last report, and you'll automatically see the types of questions that are going to come your way. Hope that answers the question. That was a little long, sorry.
That's okay. We have another question here from Lori Bartley. How do you define other earned revenue, and how is that made?
Yeah, sorry, excuse me. Other earned revenue is sort of, I should start by saying that our hands are sort of tied to the same indicators that CRA have. And so other earned revenue is revenue that is earned, and that sort of doesn't meet any of those other revenue indicators. And so it can be anything from, and they'll do it so that they leave it open for interpretation, because each institution sort of has different operations. And so essentially it can be anything from rebates, income from rental, rental of like equipment, just I would say, like, it could even be, this would go into fundraising per se, but like bingos, sometimes it'll be like bingos or some kind of fundraising, but they weren't sure to put it in fundraising. It's just, think of it as, the best way to explain it is, it's something that whoever responded, or when they filed their taxes, the organization, they didn't seem to fit in any of the predetermined indicators that are there now. And not to pick on on how people report, but keep in mind, and again, I'm sure some of you who are who are attending right now will know this. So what you have is, what we know is, this is from the last survey. When we asked these special questions, we asked about demographics and of the workforce. And so what we know is predominantly older demographic, right? And a female. And so, but a predominantly older demographic and so you're going to have, again, in these institutions, smaller ones, they don't necessarily have an accountant, in the same way that they don't necessarily have a curator or that they don't have, an accounts manager, rest assured. So how they file with CRA, like, I mean, we get this data from CRA, and so that said, I mean, there's always human error, and then so but we know. But one thing I can say is that for the other category, it's things that get lumped into there, and it tends to be actually by smaller organizations that just can't seem to find. No, I shouldn't say that. It's by organizations who can't seem to find, can't seem to populate one of the populated indicators, and so it just sort of falls in under. But that said, it's just, just like in any questionnaire or anything, there always has to be a other, so that something is anything we missed, and then just put it here. If you can't find it anywhere else, but the main thing is that we're capturing it, but yeah, of course, it would be amazing to know what all of that is. And in some cases, if you dig deep into the CRA data, they'll say what it is. So when we have our data set, it'll be like other, and what was this, And so for a church, it might, for a historic site that happens to be, it could just simply be, I don't know. I mean, there's a number of examples, but they could be it could be anything.
Thanks, Ken. Lori even added a follow-up. Could it be filming revenue for other earned revenue?
Could it be what, sorry?
Filming revenue?
Filming revenue. Yeah, I mean, it could be. Yeah, for sure. It really could be anything. And so, and again, it would be something that, like, the person or the organization filling out their tax return, they just weren't sure where to put that amount. And so, to be safe, they just put it in other. And they're allowed to do that.
Thank you. We've got a comment here from Margaret, as well as 2 questions. So Margaret just wanted to thank you for acknowledging the need for a national museums policy. And Margaret's 2 questions. The first one is, do you have a sense that federal and even provincial granting bodies are looking at museums and galleries' unique revenue and expense percentages based on their size in reviewing grant applications?
I don't know. Don't know. I'm going to say I don't know. I mean, this data, I mean, the last time around it was in 2015 that it was available to them, and then we didn't do it in 2017, and then we did it again now in 2019. They should be, but I'll tell you, I can tell you with quite a bit of confidence, in the same way that the heritage sector in BC has no money, the same applies to the heritage sector within the BC provincial government. And this is true right across the country. Even in my own department, like, when you look at the heritage sector, we're the poor cousin of cultural industries, like performing arts or film and video, or, sound recording, or we're the only not-for-profit, I mean, other than performing arts, which is half not-for-profit, all other sectors in the cultural industries are for-profit. Book publishing, magazine and periodicals, it's all for-profit. And so I imagine, and this is, I mean, not I imagine, I know in many instances, at the federal government level, man, we punch above our weight in terms of trying to do work. And I can tell you firsthand, on my floor, I know that there's passionate people working there, trying to get these programs out and money out through these programs. And then I also know at the provincial level, it's the same sort of thing. It's as sad as it is, there seems to be no, or lack of, resources at all levels. So are they looking at this when they're doing their funding? I mean, I hope so. We will be sharing this with the governments, but how programs operate by province and territory, and even at the federal level, I'm not privy, I'm not going to say I'm not privy to that, but I don't handle that side of things.
Thanks, Ken. Now, I know it's 1 o'clock and we do have just one more question. Are you able to hang out just a few more moments to answer that question?
Of course, I can answer all the questions. That's okay.
Oh, wonderful. And there was a request in the chat just for me to repeat that last question. So I did type it out, but I will repeat it verbally. So the question was, do you have a sense that federal and even provincial granting bodies are looking at a museum and gallery's unique revenue expense percentages based on their size in reviewing grant applications? So just in case anyone had missed that. Now, Ken, the question for you that we have here, again from Margaret, is information gleaned from CADAC or CADAC as a cross-check or in addition to the survey?
We are aware of CADAC. I mean, they're just a couple floors above me in my building, and so we do look at that data. But this survey is separate from that, and so there have been so for the most part, like the questions on. So for CADAC, I mean, they're getting mostly art galleries and some museums, and they tend to be the bigger institutions. And the thing is, as we capture a lot of the data that they capture, we already capture that through CRA. So we don't necessarily work in combination with them or use their data. It's very much separate. Like CADAC gets, responses or data from, I think it's in the vicinity of 150 institutions, and they're generally art galleries and museums. Our survey captures data from almost 1,900 institutions. It's just a much bigger. It's just a much bigger production or survey altogether.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions coming in. But if folks did want to reach out to you after this webinar, would they be able to contact you via email?
Yes.
Fantastic. So I'll include that in our follow-up email with the recording and the slides as well. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you again, Ken, for joining us today and sharing this information, and to thank all of our webinar participants. This was absolutely wonderful, and I learned a lot myself, so I'm sure it was very valuable for other folks as well. And I just want to remind folks that we do have another webinar coming up this October. Wednesday, October 28th, we are going to be looking at graphic standards and design, and you can register for that on our website. If you have any suggestions for topics in 2020 or wish to present a webinar yourself, you can email me at programs@museums.assn.bc.ca, and there will be a survey in your inbox following this webinar. Just filling that out helps us know how we can improve our webinars. If you don't end up with a link in your inbox, or if the link is missing, please do contact me again at that email so I can ensure you have the right link. And do consider joining us in 2020 and beyond. You can become a member of the BC Museums Association and have access to funding opportunities, free webinar participation, reduced registration fees, and access to professional development resources like the Roundup magazine, newsletters, job postings, and so much more. Thank you again, Ken, for joining us. Any last words there?
No, thank you very much for having me. Hopefully, my presentation was of some help to some of the attendees.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon, Ken, and for everyone joining us, take care.
Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye.